Hey, can you believe I built 5 CR250s at one time? 95 to 96 CR250s. These are from the golden era of Honda CRs. Check out what we did right now. I'm lifting with my left hand. It's a big project taking on 5 CR250s. At this point right here, we have 3 of the frames roughed out. And that's what it started with originally, was 3. It grew into 3 bikes from 1, 2, and then 3. And it was like, okay, we could do 3 of this at one time. It'd be a pretty big deal. So we did a ton of work on these things, and it slowly grew into 5. And we'll get to that as we go. Each of these bikes all needed frame welding. Cylinders were all damaged. Cases damaged. So you're gonna see a lot of how we went about to fix these. And so a lot of the work we did was just a lot of, I call it sourcing out and farming out and sourcing parts, where to go, where to get fixed. All the frames are in relatively good shape. We had 1 or 2 that were a little bit more damaged than others, but for the most part, they were all pretty good shape. It weren't like raced by a pro. As you can see, the one that was damaged severely on the bottom was caved in here. I didn't want to just weld it up, so we sacrificed a 4-stroke YZ450 frame. So we killed a 4-stroke to enable this CR250 to come back to life right here. So we were able to make this frame come back, and we have a really good welder buddy, Dallas, and in Southern California here, and he doesn't do it he just does it on the side and does an amazing job. On each of the frames, see, we had to weld some brackets on for the chain rollers on one of them. All of them, we welded the foot peg pinholes. So we put a tiny bit of weld in there, and then we file fit them. And as you can see, the brake tab here was bent over. Even little things like this everywhere. So on the foot peg pins, we'll file fit them so that the pins will go in nice and smooth and won't have any woggling. On these older bikes, it's always frustrating. You build a real nice bike, you paint the frame, and then the foot pegs are wobbling all over the place. And so doing things like that are those fine touches that are nice to do. So just getting it ready for paint. We got the spring from Race Tech. They spec'd out our spring. So we had the springs, subframes, and frames all painted at one time. Right here you can see we actually bought a 2000 CR250R that we robbed the forks off of, used those forks and the engine for one of the bikes. When we robbed off the forks and engine out of the aluminum frame 2000 CR250, we were able to sell that for a lot of what I paid. I paid like 900 to 1,000, I think, for the bike in its blown up condition. And I think I sold what was left for like 300. So it cost me like $500 for forks and an engine that was damaged, but it got me a good start and not too expensive. When these frames come back from San Diego powder coating, they're just gorgeous. And you can see in the first round, we did 3 at one time. The second round, we did 2, the last 2. The first ones here, we did these is red, white, and black. And I thought that was pretty good to get these 3 going like to this point right here. But we had much more in store for us. And so these 95, 96 bikes, they're all 95 or 96 frames. The only thing really drastically different is the 96 has a 38 millimeter carburetor. So having the subframes and shock springs matched gives it a real nice look. And we'll go over the engine stuff, what we did, but when we build up these chassis, it's nice to work on a bench like this. You just put it on a table, put in your races, your frame. I like to put the races in first so you can put your triple clamp on and start working with it. And you kind of build things as you go. This silver frame is a really nice, called Bengal Silver from San Diego Powder Coating. Came out really nice and pretty cool. Pretty cool look here. And you can see many people have helped. I got my buddy Cody, and we got Spencer here. Had my buddy Donnie helped, Jim. We've had different people all help along the process when we have build days, I call them. So this was a build day where we'll come out here and work for, anywhere from, 4 to 8 hours or even up to 10 hours. But usually a build day gets a lot done because I've already done a lot of the hard part of rounding up the parts, filing, fitting, everything. Triple clamps were a bit of a chore. We rounded up, and you can see even this one was pretty rough. Somebody had dragged it across the asphalt, it appears. Little things like that. It's like I didn't want to have to go find more clamps, and the more stuff I could avoid having to buy on eBay was really nice. So again, just things like that we'd weld up and we could buff it off. And there's a few of the clamps we actually had to bore out as well. When you weld like this, you can simply, if you buff off, sand and blend it in, the next trick is vapor blasting. That's really nice nowadays. You can also do a form of sandblasting, a dry blasting. Vapor blasting helps cover up those imperfections and blends things in. Alan Brown in Riverside, California, longtime professional mechanic, he's one that helped me bore out the triple clamps, which is a really nice thing to be able to do, so that you can custom fit the newer forks into the older clamps. You don't have to go get special clamps made. So it's a really nice thing he's able to do. Everything stays nice, and I call it Sano because it all stays the way you really like it to. There's Alan right there. He's from Canada, does a lot of the Canadian Nationals, works with some of the race teams. You can see here we built up a bunch of the clamps at one time and then get those races in a freezer, put those in, and heat up your clamps, and you're going to press these stems in and then bearings on. I have a nice press that helps a ton. It's nice to be able to use a press, and that helps a ton, be able to just really do a good job on all these things at one time. We have a lot of the Pro X bearings we use throughout the chassis on the Swingarms, linkage, these steering stem bearings. Pro X has a pretty good line of bearings for that stuff, and we're able to get those on there. I have a lot of custom, spacers made up over the years that help make this a good process. Oh, that's a nice feeling when it hits right on its home right there. And then packing bearings is pretty easy, just like your grandpa taught you. Just packing them in there in those needle rollers like that. It's the best way to do it. And you can see it's a little overwhelming when you can see all the parts we have laid out. We build those up. And then throughout the process, we got a lot of the hubs over to Sano Metal Finishing, who Cerakoted the hubs for us. And we could assemble those things as well. At the same time, we're knocking out, you can see how nice the linkages look, all vapor blasted. This is the end of a good build day. We got a lot done. You can see a couple of the bikes are ready to go. This is the depressing stuff when you have piles of air boxes and the many parts that need a lot of attention. So a lot of scrubbing, cleaning, and Sano Metal Finishing in Southern California helped a ton with that process. The air boots themselves come out pretty clean. We just soak them in some tire cleaner in a bag for a few days, and they come out looking really nice, get the moisture back in there. So that's a pretty cool little trick. Norm Francis taught me that trick, and it works really nice. You can get the rubber kind of looking really good again. We did have a tough time sourcing one of our last boots, and we could even use one better boot now, so they're tough to find. Those are discontinued, and so are these air boxes themselves are discontinued, which a lot of the parts are. Surprisingly, there are some good ones still left. So we decided on these black air boxes that we would Cerakote them black, so that when it scrapes through, you would only see black if you ever scrape through it. And then the white ones we just clean up really nice with vapor blasting and cleaner, and you can see it just came out really well. I mean, it's about as good as you can do for these older bikes. Guys want way too much money for a beat up airbox on eBay, let's say. And then building up the air boots and boxes, you can see all of our pieces are clean. It's nice having that. And this is one of the dirtiest parts of these older bikes typically. When you have a 30-year-old bike, there's many areas that are kind of ugly looking, but for sure the airbox, most of them haven't been cleaned in 30 years. So doing that to these just makes it really nice. That ring that goes on the top there, we even Cerakoted that piece, and then we put silicone all the way around this area right here. Back in the 90s, this area's like to suck dirt. So you get those on there and glued on there. It doesn't want to come apart very well after you do this. So we found this out the hard way because one of the boots we put on was actually for a 125, and they are not the same. The air boxes are the same, but the air boot is not. So that we learned a tough lesson there, and that was one of the things that hurt us in trying to find another boot for these things. So this boot, again, in pretty good shape, and you're able to, assemble these things. I think one day we worked on just assembling air boxes and getting all these things kind of set and sealed up nicely. And those baffles are important that are on the sides of the airbox. You want to have those in there. That helps it run well. Swing arms, this is a really tough thing to try to, skimp on. They are pretty ugly. When they're any of these old bikes, they're pretty nasty looking. And as you can see, just getting them stripped apart, getting all the bearings out, getting all the screws out that hold on the chain guide and so forth, and making sure that your chain adjuster bolt comes out. That's a very important thing. So just getting this stuff apart, and when we use these, we're using a degreaser, power washing them before they go to anywhere else, for any other type of work. And see, my van here, I actually bought a swing arm at the track from a guy that met us out there with a carburetor and so forth. You can see how nice the swing arms come out. When I just pay a polisher, and I've known this guy for over 25 years, Geronimo in Southern California, All-American Polishing. He does a great job. And so between him and sandblasted and vapor blasted the insides to give it that dull look, and then he polishes the outside, and it gives it that gorgeous polish look. And you can, if you don't like it that shiny, you just hit it with Scotch-Brite and you can knock it down to get it, a little bit more dull. This now when we assemble these swing arms, we like to get those chain guides on, and UFO still has those pieces available. So those are available, and the aluminum chain guide piece is still available from Honda, surprisingly. So that's really nice. We have the Works Connection chain adjuster bolts, which are titanium there. This is where all the linkage is. This is typical of how these 30-year-old bikes are going to look in that situation there. Takes a lot of tools. We always have so many tools on these build days out. Cleaning up parts is just so much work, and then doing so many bikes at one time, you can see kind of how monumental it was just keeping it all organized, having so many bikes going and rounding up parts all at the same time. I always had a box going with all the various parts that were waiting and were rounding up, and I would keep them all ready to go. And what was next to get done. It was just a common, there's our forks, another swing arm, and then you get right back to cleaning up parts. And we cleaned them up many different ways. And we gathered up a lot of extra parts in the process. Not a ton of valuable stuff, but we had some stuff. The Kickstarters, we actually bought those on eBay. They were like $49, $50 range, I think it was. And I probably couldn't think of a better way to do it, even though they're cheap. If you have to buy another one, I would just do that for the Kickstarters. The louvers is a tough one. Some guys have said they made the CR125 ones work. I need to look at that again because another guy told me that they do work. I didn't have much luck, so I need to check into that. You can see all the types of different cleaning we do, and vapor blasting is just a big part of this process. And as I rewatch and all that we're doing, I realize how much of it is involved in that. Radiators are all usually pretty beat up. Buying aftermarket radiators is a bleak proposition, I think, because they're always terrible. So these radiators, it takes the fins themselves take a lot of work just to go bend the fins back. And then ICW is able to strengthen the radiators and straighten them out really well. And then you can actually see those Samco hoses in there, which I got from that Phil Denton Engineering in England. The tumbler we use for a lot of the bolt cleanup works really well. Doing that, put some mag wheel polish in there that helps clean them up as well, and they can do tumbling. Brake day was pretty overwhelming, as you can see, having just brakes. I worked on brakes. One day was like just assembling brakes after vapor blasting. The reservoirs for the rear looked pretty ugly. These are actually still available from Honda, but I thought I would give each bike a custom look by Cerakoting it kind of to match the engine and the other parts we did on those bikes. So, again, Pro X has kits for that. for these brakes. And as you can see, we're always going back and forth to the microfiche online to look at the best, to make sure we're putting things back the correct way. When you're rebuilding brakes, having some brake fluid there after you rebuild them, to use brake fluid throughout the process is really important. Patience, I would say, most of the time, most people aren't going to be doing 4 or 5 sets of brakes one day, but that's what it took for me. And throughout this process, I would go through and find out I'm missing some pieces, or one of the pistons was bad, have to go rob it out of another set of brakes. So some bikes, 35 years, everything looks really nice, and some don't. So cleaning up brakes and doing this was a big part of our process. I was pretty concerned about it doing so many that it would be a lot of hold up for us, so to speak, but it turned out not to be too bad. With brakes, you don't need too many specialty tools. Need some circlip pliers. Air helps a ton when you're knocking out the pistons, and just a bunch of patience. Again, taking your time, doing a good job. Mini bikes don't actually need to be rebuilt, but it's nice to make sure everything's good and new. Again, we've got those Pro X pieces on there, and you can see how we're able to change out every single piece when we go to reassemble it. And again, the brake fluid, is a big help when you go to reassemble. You don't want any other fluids in there contaminating the brake fluid, like grease or anything. You want it to be just the brake fluid. Some of the pistons were so stuck, we actually had to heat them up. We just couldn't get them to shoot out. And now this is a little bit of we learned a good system there where we wanted them to shoot out evenly. So we want one to shoot out at a time. So we'd actually use like brake pads to hold them there, and then get thinner and thinner as we go. This is a pretty cool little trick we kind of learned to get these things out of there. Because if you shoot one out by itself, it can make it tough to get that last one out. You don't ever want to put pliers on these things. You want to be able to get them out without pliers, of course. We take every piece apart. Every piece comes out, gets cleaned, and goes back in, and it's blown off a bunch of times. You can see we also put grease on all those pivot points. You see another one here that was just so hard to even get apart right there, just all galled up in there. So brakes, and the stock Honda stuff is so good from back then that in many cases you're in good shape. And you can see our brake levers there. We like to use the stock Honda brake levers. Galfer makes the lines, and you see we are actually tuning it and twisting it. Those Supermoto tires kind of confused people for a while when they'd see those in some of our posts. Those were just on there to help roll the bikes around. One of the bikes we got had those. Great guy donated those to us. Bleeding brakes is a big job. Just pushing the caliper apart here. That sends fluid up. We have good videos, full videos on brake bleeding. If you ever want to check those out, we can do that. This is our McGrath-themed 1996 looking bike. I always take the sitting down jobs. Whenever you put these screws on, always make sure you put a little grease on that surface so they don't ever get stuck in there. You get those things stuck, I'm sure people have felt that, and it's not great. These rubber boots are still available from Honda, which is really cool. So those look really nice, and they're about $10 each. Tech 167 makes these 3D printed brake holders, and we leave those things on all the time. The rear brake pedals, Enduro Engineering makes a brake tip that's really nice looking piece. The only thing it's really a tough job to grind off the old brake tip, and then you have to drill new holes to put 5mm threads in there for their brake tip, but it works perfect. As you can see, it just comes out so nice looking, and all of our brake tips were all just ruined. So it's pretty cool to have that going on. Phil Denton Engineering in England makes these axle blocks as well. I could have cleaned up the stock ones, but it was nice to get those ones ready to go. You can see how nice our first 3 engines, we kind of got those done similar time frame. And Brad was a huge help. If you watch my videos a lot, I've talked about Brad before. He's the one that helped split all these things apart. So once we got them all apart, we cleaned them with degreaser, buffed them off, and then it was we assessed what needed to be welded. And that was a real common thing, that something was typically either damaged from somebody prying on the cases or from something breaking, piston breaking, whatever, crank. And so they all have to be cleaned up at Sano Metal Finishing. And then Andrew Langston in Southern California rebuilt all of our crankshafts. And that's a big thing, to use an OEM quality Pro X rod on your existing crankshaft. You're able to do that, so it's really cool. Again, carburetors are important. We were able to round up all the 96 38 millimeter carburetors, and TMR will go over that when he does the cylinders, but he gave us the setup, the jetting we wanted to use, and all that with those carburetors. Brad does a great job of assembling the engines, and assembling 5 of these things over a year period. It was about a year period that he was probably doing the engines themselves, and it's a big job. Spec bolt is huge on all of our builds, especially these older bikes. It's important to have just this great looking hardware throughout the build. You see Brad, he centers that crankshaft up, make sure everything's moving correctly. You can see how nice it is working with everything nice and clean. It looks like he's working on a 2024 bike here, but this is, you know, a 30-year-old bike. We got the Recluse full clutch in here. Got the basket, the inner hub, their pressure plate, all the pieces, and we're able to install this new torque drive clutch. We got the Wiseco piston, and those numbers you see on there, that writing, that's from when the piston and cylinder are at Millennium. Tom Morgan's the one that spec'd out the clearances and everything, and when they like to know exactly what size the piston measures, and that way it's able to be perfectly fit to the piston. Brad set up the power valves when they come back, that everything is just working perfectly. You can see the engines, when they come back from Sano, we're able to do some color, you know, accents with some of the pieces, to, you know, like this black that we got on this one. We did the black and burnt bronze between the two bikes, and they just came out so nice. We do have a full engine build video on this bike. Sano has to do a lot of prep work on these pieces, as you can see when they go to Cerakote these things. It's a lot of work. Get back to these cylinders and get these things on the engines, and you can see as it starts to come together, it's pretty cool. We have the V-Force reed cage on there as well, and then there's the good look at the burnt bronze pieces. This carburetor on the left was actually vapor blasted by somebody else. It came out way too shiny, so I actually have it knocked down some to make it look less ugly. Our jetting's important. Again, I use the TMR jetting that he gave us, and so we want to look up those specs. We got the correct needles for all of them, and we got the Motion Pro throttle setups that we were getting all set up there. I call it this half moon piece for the chain guide. This is still available from Honda, so we got that piece, and then you have to use different length bolts since you're not running the plastic cover. Tusk makes a nice looking shifter, but I didn't want to run this color accents, so we actually had it vapor blasted so it'd look kind of like a stock look, you know, so just like we did the Kickstarters at the same time to knock those down. And you can see this carburetor that was all shiny now is, you know, kind of a duller look, which looks really nice, you know, to do that all at the same time. Hopefully you're enjoying the video so far. Nearly all the parts for these builds are available from RockyMountainATVMC.com. You can go to our link in the description below to help you purchase those and any other parts you need. We didn't catch even a quarter of all of our cleaning. We just cleaned nonstop. Everything needed to be cleaned. Any wheels we got, seats, air boxes, everything needed to be cleaned. Most of the tanks we had were pretty much junk and just weren't worth trying to polish out and fix up. So we got the Clark tanks, which do have an imperfection. Their mold is old. It's 30 years. They sell it for a decent deal, but they still look really nice. And so we were able to use those tanks. On the wheels, we like to use the stock hubs. We didn't have a lot of choice, especially on the rear. The front hub on these bikes is the same as some of the newer bikes. We're able to actually use some new hubs on a couple of them. So we wanted to strip these all down, and we knock all the bearings out, just toss the rims, toss the spokes, and we're going to get these things, you know, blasted. And Pro X has rotors for these things to go with the brake pads and everything else that they carry for these bikes. So while they're down, you know, we were doing this process throughout. Motion Pro makes the special tool on the Hondas. You have this piece right here, which it's nice to kind of grind out that there are things that hold it in place. They have these 4 little divots. It can be a little tricky We had some that were close, but we got them all fixed. This is what it looks like after Sano gets in there and blasts them, and we got our new bearings and seals all ready to go in. It's pretty nice looking. It looks seriously like brand new. Freeze the bearings, and you got your bearing driver, and you can just knock it in. It's nice to have something hold the bearing on the other side as you go about to do that. Fronts aren't too bad to do. A lot of guys will forget that spacer in there. You can't forget that spacer. That needs to be in there to set those bearings the right distance apart and gives your axle a place to float. Heat's your friend on aluminum and then freezing stuff. Again, there's the spacer for the rear one. You can drop that in, and got our new bearings. Seal's nice to have grease, always grease on any of the seal surfaces so that everything moves well. These collars right here are still available from Honda, those rings. And I didn't peen ours in case we ever have to take it apart. See how nice those things look. After our wheels are built, it's time for cut some chains. Cutting the chains. Breaking the chains, right? So grinding it, this always freaks everybody out, but I'm not sure why. I think because the sparks are hitting the fender there, they think that it's damaging all. It looks worse on video than it is in person. So we get all these chains cut to the right length, and we're just using the regular moto chain, no O-ring or X-ring chain on these, just a regular chain. Oh, that's a big old chunk of grease there, huh? That's quite a bit. So if you have the good tools, makes everything nice and easy. Just get on, and with a Master Link, I'm sure everybody knows, but you want your Master Link clip to be facing the opposite direction the wheel rolls, because if you don't, it'll for sure get knocked off when it's flowing through and there's some mud up at your countershaft or at the rear. It'll knock that clip right off. Motion Pro makes a cool little tool for that. That's really nice. So you can see this is our silver rims. We have two bikes with silver rims. And these rims were going on the white frame Hondas. We did a kind of a 92 to 94 look one, and then we did the 96 McGrath one. And so we wanted, you can see right here, the McGrath one, we wanted those silver rims on there to kind of match that look of that McGrath themed bike. And everybody's seen it, me do tires changes a bunch. We have videos on that. If you want to check out how we, install tires and our tire stand and all that, we have plenty of videos on any of that stuff. We're putting on brand new MX-34s here. We have our Pro X sprocket on there, and of course the Pro X rotor. So everything's coming together pretty well. And we have those junky wheels you see on the bikes. Those are going to be for our runners, we call them, when it's time to jet the bikes in and to zip them up and down the road. That's the wheels we'll be using that just have some junky tires, but the wheels are in good enough shape that we'll be able to run around and do that. So it's kind of nice to have those for our look here. The black rims you see are on the other three bikes. The black rims are Nackstar rims, and those came out really well as well. And Brad at Parapros is the one that helped assemble all those wheels. So he can also do the wheel builds besides doing the engine works that he does such a great job on. Now, unfortunately, FMF doesn't have a Shorty for this bike, and it would look so much better with it being a Shorty. So we got the regular power core, and we just cut it. And I did the first three with me and my buddy Jim. And then when I was talking to Robbie Pipe Repair, he's like, well, I could do some. So the next two bikes, I actually had him do the last two. And it's just a little bit of a job because you really got to pay attention, re-rivet it, all those types of things. And it doesn't just cut off straight because the tips, these inserts need to be longer. So we actually had to cut them and then weld them. And when you have a really cool welder guy, he'll actually stop by and just weld them for you on his way home from work. That doesn't happen too often, just so you know. But he's able to just tack weld them in place. And so that's pretty cool to do, and then we're able to make them the right length. And sure, man, a bunch of work to make some cool shorties. And again, the last two went a lot easier for me because I didn't have to do them. Robbie's did them. Boy, that looks nice, man. Of course, I did have to get a new Shorty sticker. The pipes do get, when I want to take the chrome off, because they don't have a non-plated one, we have to get it acid dipped, and then Robbie's able to then buff it off. We actually got some cool FMF badges to weld on right in there, and then he's able to give it the cool look, you know, a little bit factory look around the welds, heating it up. Man, did a really good job. It's pretty cool. And he was able to cut, he's got a little bit better tools for cutting and all that kind of stuff, and so he's able to do those last two, like I said, at his shop up in NorCal, and did a great job. I'm always sitting down, it seems like, man. People want to know why my bike's not on a lift. Well, I like getting around, man, and the lift, you're working too far away. And we work on too many bikes to be on a lift. So here we got the stock, we got a little gasket spacer thing that goes in here. I like to use some 1211 or any type of good silicone in there, and that'll help seal this pipe up to the cylinder. Most of these cylinders in this area right here are a little bit bigger than they used to be. So they're not going to fit as good as they did. This pipe's still chromed. We're actually going to get the last one stripped and get the last one done as well here in the near future for the last bike. So we've done 4 of them are, you know, not chromed, and so we're going to do this last one here soon. Tightening up the pipe, making sure everything fits. Whenever you put a pipe on, always start with the pipe first and just leave everything loose while you fit up the silencer. Getting the pipes fitted up was a nice step in the builds. Again, starting on the tables is key, for me anyway, being able to work on the bike at a good level and not getting the suspension on too soon. Trying to do everything I can at a nice, easy level like this works really well. Some people actually assemble them in their mudroom or in their house, which is kind of nice. Depending upon where you live, it might be nice if it's too hot or too cold out in your shop. ODI still makes the nice 7/8 bars. Everybody's gone to the, you know, thick bars nowadays, but the 7/8 bars are totally cool for these older bikes. Motion Pro makes a cool new throttle setup for this thing. Brad at ParaPros went through all of our carburetors, which was a lot of work to make sure all those were good and clean after being vapor blasted, and then we get in, again, all that TMR jetting in there. IMS still makes the pegs for this bike, which is really cool. Get some nice, clean looking pegs that aren't too expensive. To get those on there, it looks really good. Spec bolt, again, a big part of what we do on these old bikes. As you can see, it's really important. The axle blocks are a really cool feature to have on here. And again, the Samco hoses are available from the same guy that made the axle blocks in England. Phil Denton Engineering. I think he actually has changed the name of his shop to something else, but I think you can find him that way. Messing with forks took us a bit. We did have some few things off the first time or 3 to where we didn't have things lined up right. And you can see one bike still has silver fork tubes. We end up getting all those hard anodized. The black you see on the suspension, it's kind of a big deal because it's hard anodized, and many of the bikes need that because they're so worn out. It took us 10 sets of suspension to make these 5 bikes, and there's no joke about that. This is one of the most popular tools I used on these builds was time certs. So many threads are stripped out. It's just crazy. A time cert kit's really helpful if you're going to be working on bikes for the rest of your life. I'd at least have a 6mm one with various sizes and other pieces to help you in the process. But as you can see, the suspension again is just such a big deal on these builds, and it makes a big difference in how much the build's going to cost if your suspension's ruined and so forth. Spencer was one of the ones that was mainly in charge of, making sure all of our pieces, all of our hardware was lining up. This plastic's so old, on some of these you have to drill them out on the front fender. Not so common nowadays. Most of your plastic all comes right. So you have to drill things out, do a little bit more work than you would on newer bikes. I like these things to fit snug with the spacer, so I try to drill them so that the spacers will just press right in, so they stay in place. Always when you're putting these kind of bolts in and you're blind, it's best to use like a nut driver, something like this one. This will help you be able to guide the bolts in without, a T-handle or a ratchet getting in your way. Total, these builds have been going on for over 2 years, off and on. And when I say off, it's more off than on. I was always doing something. There's always a week or so where I'm doing something, but it's usually just moving stuff around. And again, back to that time cert, putting another one in. The pipe mounts are very common, and tank mounts and the fork lug for the fork guard was a very common one as well. So whenever we think we'd have something ready to be finished, it'd be like, oh, these threads are stripped out. It's like, and they would look fine, but then just come right out. So that's part of the downside of a 30-year-old bike. That's what happens, Another one, that's the tank mount. And you can see we have our nice wiring there on our hour meter. That hour meter runs up to the works connection hour meter. We'll show a picture of that later where we have the custom mount we made. There's a few days where all the bikes are lined up like this, where we'll just have full all bike day. Most of the time it was just working on one or two of the bikes, but there's days where we just laid out all the bikes and we're gonna work on all of them. We're gonna put chains on all day. We're gonna put wheels on. We're gonna organize that we have the right wheel spacers on each bike. It was an immense amount of work. The number one bike you see here is the one we got done first. That was actually at the Langston's Bike Show in the fall of 23. That's when we first got that one done. And then the rest were not too far along behind it. And again, with our regular life and riding and working, I don't let the pressure of these things get to me, so we just let them go. It's not like some fake, what do you call that? Reality shows where they got to get the build done by a certain day. We just keep going, and hopefully we'll have them all done for whenever it's important. Filling up gas in these things for the first start was kind of exciting. It was pretty cool. So mixed up some R50, 40-to-1. Spencer hasn't started a whole lot of 252 strokes in his life without a electric button. So it's nice to get him out there. He wanted to make sure he had that boot on while he's kicking away. What a great sound to hear. And whenever anybody finishes a full rebuild, even if it's just one bike, when you get that bike started up and everything's working good, you just feel like you're number one. So we had to get 5 started. I think we got 3 or 4 started the same day the first time and had some issues. Different little things that we figured out. So it took us probably 2 or 3 weeks to get them all running at the same place, so where they're all running. The first bike we got started actually didn't run when it went to the show. We had never started it. So we just got it to where it all looked right. We had never started it or put oil in it or anything like that. This is at the Langston show, and again, it was a real big hit to have this out there. Most of the bikes are much older vintage bikes, or considered vintage or 70s bike, let's say. But it's really cool to see these out there. Everybody really likes them. You can see the Fast Company makes a really cool clevis piece there with our spring. And then we shot this bike with Dirt Bike Magazine. That was a big deal to then shoot that there, and it came out in the magazine already before it was ever running. So we were able to get it in the magazine. It came out really, really cool looking. And the look of this is kind of a 92 to 95 look mixed up with a lot of different things, and just looks really cool with the blue and yellow. So wanted each bike to look a bit different, and so that's why we kind of went with a different look for each one and didn't paint each frame white and make them all look the same. And the red we chose here is actually the gas red. I joke around that this is the red that Honda should have been using forever. And there's always a little bit of evil or militia out there for guys, so I want to do an all black one. So we got that look going as well. We got that one covered. Probably should have done the engine black as well, but the burnt bronze look in here makes it look, gives it some color and life to it as well. It looks really nice. Here's another good shot of the forks. All of them have been hard anodized, and many of them were damaged inside. So when they hard anodize, and that builds up that material inside, so then that they can work again. And that's what's really nice. And that Aluminart in Southern California actually polishes the outer tubes out really well, so that's what helps them look so good, even if they've been all pitted up. And so that's a really good feature for a lot of bike builds you can do. Right now, you can see our radiator louvers there. Those are from AK Technologies, is 3D printing those, and he's actually still testing a different material to get one that's a little bit better and not as likely to crack. So he's just testing on those, and so it's coming along pretty well. We should have some new ones on there really soon. Unifilter makes our air filter for us. Those tank straps are still available from Honda. You can see we have a couple brand new ones on there. And that sparkle you see in the tank, that's actually just dust from these things sitting around. So we have to constantly blow them off and start over and cleaning these things up. We have a lot of that. A lot of good works connection pieces on these bikes. These lugs were black. I actually just spray painted them black again as well on the fork lugs. You see how well the pipes look. It's just awesome. With our graphics, Decal Works made us some custom looking stuff. On this pink bike, I call it pink, it's nuclear red is what they call the plastic. It's basically impossible to get anyone to match that color. It's too difficult, and the color changes a lot with the sun, different lighting. So on there, we didn't want to put any of that color on there, so all the stickers are free floating and not, so they're on clear to help them just look the way they should on top of that nuclear red color. Those Honda hoses, we get lots of questions about those, and we have the part number on our Google Doc. If you want to get those Honda overflow hoses for your carburetors, that's a good place to do it. The kill switches are still available from Honda, or we have the Tusk ones on here that work great and look good. And also, again, the hour meter is important, for me anyway. I like to have an hour meter to show us what we got. We made some custom little brackets from some IMS pieces we have from the catch cans and make a cool little bracket since there's nowhere to bolt it up there. putting our last sets of graphics on right now, and we have our McGrath replica looking bike, and that's gonna be for Racer X, and then we have our Whiskey Throttle 101 bike here that's gonna be just kind of a cool all-around look with the silver frame. And DecalWorks made us just worked really hard to help work with me to come up with custom graphics for each bike that would have it stand out and look different with similar companies on there. And with a lot of this retro look, we did some fun things like the 1-800 FMF race, and instead of 1-800 collect, we did some fun things like that. And the Wiseco logo, where the camel logo would be, and different things like that. So tried to come up with some cool things. And MotoSeat does a great job of matching our seat cover to whatever we come up with on our graphics, and which is really nice to have. So installing the graphics, again, it's always about time. We have a good video that you can go find of us putting graphics on one of our more current bikes. As far as graphics go, I like to just have everything perfectly clean. We use glass cleaner first, and then a little bit of contact cleaner or alcohol on clean blue paper towels we use, and just wipe everything down really well so that you have a really good surface to put everything on. And just taking my time, that's a big key. Taking your time, and heat can be your friend. If you have a little boo-boo or you need to stretch things, a little bit of heat can help. So we'll do that in many cases. And DecalWorks just does a great job of making graphics that are relatively easy to install, and everything lines up well, even on a 30-year-old bike. MotoSeat also was able to fit all of our bikes with new foam, because the foams were just so trashed that we were able to put new foam on each of the bikes before we put the seat covers on. A couple of the bikes have seat covers from that time period, so we got those from Throttle Jockey and actually used the MotoSeat seat foam, and he was able to fit those up for us. Hopefully you enjoyed that long video. It's been an incredible process in doing these. We didn't film the entire process, not real good at doing that. Some guys are, my buddy Rado is. We enjoy just getting the work done and getting out to riding, so we don't tend to film everything we probably should. But it was a great time working on all these things. We're gonna have more and more content coming out on these bikes as each one finishes and gets further along the process. Each one of them has their own theme, as we've mentioned. They're all different, and so they're all going to have their own look and feel, and that's going to be really cool. So hopefully you enjoy that. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and when you're shopping, use our links in our description below. See you next time.